But I was inspecting one of my own construction sites when I noticed something wasn't right. The steel looked wrong. The supports didn't match the plans. Before I could halt the work, a section of scaffolding collapsed, crushing my leg. Hours later, waking up from emergency surgery, I called my daughter for help. She sighed and said, "Dad, don't expect me to drop everything. If you need someone to take care of you, hire a nurse." So I did. Then I made 5 phone calls, and everything my daughter and son-in-law had been building against me began to come apart one piece at a time. I am so grateful you're here. Before we begin, tell me in the comments what city or country are you watching from. Your answer means more than you know. This is Family Stories Revenge, and this is family drama revenge at its most human. Note, this story includes fictional elements for educational purposes. Names and settings are coincidental. The lesson, however, is not. The first thing I noticed when I opened my eyes was not the pain. It was the silence. Not the peaceful kind, not the silence of a Sunday morning when Margaret used to sleep in, and I'd sit on the back porch with my coffee and watch the Houston sky turn from gray to gold. This was a different kind of silence. The kind that wraps around you like a fist and squeezes slow and deliberate until your chest understands something your brain hasn't caught up to yet. The ceiling above me was white. Institutional white. The kind of white that has never known warmth. A fluorescent light hummed directly overhead, steady and indifferent the way machines are indifferent, because they don't know any better and because nobody asked them to care. I was in a recovery room at Houston Methodist. I knew that much before I was fully awake, the way you know certain things in your bones before your mind has the language for them. The smell of antiseptic. The soft mechanical beeping of the monitor beside my bed. The particular quality of the air recycled, temperature-controlled, belonging to nobody. My right knee was wrapped in so many layers of bandaging, it felt like a separate object attached to my body, something foreign, something that had been placed there while I was under and had not yet introduced itself. The surgeon had told me before they put me under that the joint was severely damaged. Crushed was the word she used. She said it the way doctors say difficult things, plainly without decoration, because decoration doesn't help anyone. I reached for my phone with a hand that felt like it belonged to a man 20 years older than me. Slow. Unreliable. The hand of someone who had just had his body taken apart and put back together and was not entirely sure all the pieces had been returned in the right order. The screen lit up. No missed calls, no text messages, nothing from Emily, nothing from Ryan. I stared at that screen for a long moment. My chest felt like someone had reached inside and taken hold of something important, and was simply holding it, not squeezing, not twisting, just holding, waiting to see what I would do. I pressed Emily's name. 4 rings. I counted them the way you count things when you are trying to stay calm, and the counting is the only anchor you have. She picked up on the 4th. "Dad." Her voice was clipped, efficient, the voice she used in meetings when an interruption had arrived at an inconvenient time. I could hear keyboards in the background, the low murmur of an office running at full speed. "Are you okay?" "Emily." My throat was raw from the anesthesia tube. I swallowed hard and tried again. "I just came out of surgery. The surgeon says the damage to my knee is more serious than the scans suggested. I'm going to need someone here with me." There was a pause. Not the pause of someone absorbing difficult news. The pause of someone deciding how to manage an inconvenience. "Dad, I'm in the middle of closing a contract. We're talking about a $40 million deal that cannot wait." Her voice dropped slightly, took on that particular tone, patient. Careful the tone you use with someone you've decided not to argue with, because arguing would take too long. You have the resources to hire the absolute best care available in Houston. Use them. That's what they're for. My mouth opened. I had 30 years of things I wanted to say, a lifetime of them. What came out was barely a whisper. Emily, I can't feel my leg properly. I just came out of surgery. I'll call you tonight, Dad. The keyboards in the background kept going. I promise. The line went dead. I sat with the phone against my chest for a moment. My heart was hammering not from the surgery, but from something older and deeper, something that had been building for a long time and had just found its shape. I pressed redial. The phone rang once and rolled to voicemail. She had sent me to voicemail. Her own father, 3 hours out of surgery, sent to voicemail like a telemarketer. My thumb found Ryan's name before I had consciously decided to call him. He picked up immediately. Too immediately, the way people pick up when they've been expecting a call they'd rather not take but have decided it's better to control than to avoid. I could hear music in the background, the low, warm acoustics of an upscale restaurant, the clink of glassware. Mr. Carter. He never called me Dad. In 11 years, he had never once called me Dad. I heard you had a rough morning. Heard. Past tense. Casual. Like someone describing weather. Ryan. I pressed my free hand flat against the hospital blanket, feeling the fabric under my palm, needing something solid. I need someone here. Emily won't come. I need Mr. Carter. His voice carried that particular warmth that had always made my skin crawl, the warmth of a man who has rehearsed sincerity so many times, it comes out smooth. A man who built what you built surely knows how to find good help. You have every resource in the city at your disposal. He chuckled. A short, light sound. The sound a man makes when he finds something mildly amusing. A joke at a dinner party. A minor inconvenience that doesn't affect him personally. Take care of yourself, he said. We'll check in soon. The line went dead. I held the phone against my chest and looked back up at that humming fluorescent light. The monitor beside me beeped its patient, indifferent rhythm. Somewhere down the hall, a cart rattled past on tile floors. The world outside this room continued exactly as it had, before completely unmoved by the fact that my daughter had just sent me to voicemail, and my son-in-law had laughed. My eyes burned. I blinked hard twice, furious at the burning, furious at myself for being surprised. The anger moved through me like something hot, and then settled into something colder and more useful, the particular cold clarity that had gotten me through every hard moment in 60 years of building things. Margaret would have been here already. She would have driven herself through Houston traffic at 7 in the morning, walked in still wearing her reading glasses, because she'd been up since 5, pulled up a chair so close to my bed that the nurses would have had to ask her twice to move it. She would have held my hand and asked every question the doctors hadn't thought to answer and driven every nurse on the floor half crazy with her thoroughness. But Margaret had been gone 4 years. And the people I had trusted to fill the space she left were laughing at me from restaurant tables. I looked down at my phone. My hand had stopped shaking. There was a version of this moment where I lay back against the pillow and waited, where I told myself there was some explanation, some context I was missing, some way to make the last 20 minutes mean something other than what they meant. I had spent 60 years building Carter Infrastructure Group from nothing. From a second-hand drafting table in a rented office in Houston, Texas, to a company worth hundreds of millions of dollars. I had survived 2 recessions, 3 near bankruptcies, and 100 moments when lesser men would have walked away. I had not survived any of them by waiting. I thought about the corporate charter I had signed in 2003, the document I had insisted on drafting myself, clause by clause, over Robert Hayes's patient objections. Article 7, Section 4, the founding shareholder, provided he retained more than 51% of Class A voting shares, could remove any executive officer immediately and without board supermajority. I had written that clause because I believed that what a man builds, he must also be able to protect. I had 60% of those shares. I had never needed to use that clause. I picked up the phone again. Not to call my daughter. Not to call my son-in-law. To make the first of 5 calls that would change everything. I made the first call to Houston Methodist's private care coordination office. A woman answered on the second ring, professional and unhurried. "This is Daniel Carter in post-surgical recovery," I said. My voice was steadier than I expected. "I need a private duty nurse assigned to me immediately. Full-time around the clock. Your best available." "Of course, Mr. Carter. I can have someone reach out within 30 minutes, also," I said. "Not within the hour. 30 minutes. A brief pause. "Understood." The second call was to Robert Hayes. He had been my attorney for 25 years, the kind of lawyer who answered on the first ring when he saw my name because he had learned over 2 decades that when Daniel Carter called, it was never about something small. "Robert," I kept my voice even. "I need you to activate the emergency oversight clause in the company charter, Article 7, Section 4, today." "Daniel." His voice shifted, not alarm, but the focused sharpness of a man switching gears instantly. "Are you sure? I'm lying in a hospital bed with a destroyed knee, and my daughter just sent me to voicemail." "Yes, Robert. I'm sure." A beat of quiet. "I'll be in motion within the hour." The third call went to First Capital, Texas. I spoke with the branch manager directly, a man who knew my account history well enough to understand that when I said something needed to happen today, I did not mean tomorrow morning. "Flag every transaction over $10,000 on all Carter infrastructure accounts for manual review," I told him. "And remove Emily Carter Walsh and Ryan Walsh's signing authority on every account where I am the primary holder. Effective immediately." I paused. "My attorney will be filing a temporary restraining order with the court this afternoon to freeze the remaining accounts. Coordinate with his office when it arrives." The fourth call lasted less than a minute. Michael Grant picked up on the second ring. He had served as Carter Infrastructure's CFO for 19 years before I'd let Emily convince me to bring in someone younger. Biggest mistake I'd made since the recession of 2008. "Michael," I said, "I need you back. Not next week. Today." There was 1 second of quiet. Then "I'll be there by noon." That was Michael. No questions. No negotiation. Just the answer. The fifth call went to an independent construction audit firm, a company I had used twice before for third-party quality reviews. I told them I needed a full inspection of every active Carter infrastructure site, beginning immediately with Site 7 in Northwest Houston. I told them to document everything they found and to report directly to Robert Hayes. After I hung up, I placed the phone face down on the blanket beside me. My hand was trembling slightly, not from fear, but from the particular exhaustion that comes after the body has held itself together through sheer will for too long. That was when the door opened. She was about 40 years old, with dark hair pulled back, and the kind of calm in her eyes that doesn't come from personality. It comes from years of sitting beside people in the worst moments of their lives and learning not to flinch. She glanced at my chart first. Then she looked directly at me. "Mr. Carter?" Her voice was clear and unhurried. "I'm Sarah Bennett. I was told you requested private duty nursing." She set the chart down and looked at the phone beside my hand, then back at my face. "Your blood pressure is higher than it should be for someone 2 hours post-op. Have you been making phone calls? Despite everything, despite the burning in my eyes, and the wreckage of the morning, and the hollow place in my chest, where my daughter's voice should have been." I almost smiled. "A few," I said. "That explains it." She pulled the chair beside my bed without asking permission, sat down and began reviewing my medication log, with the focused attention of someone who actually intended to read it. She didn't ask who I was. She didn't adjust her posture when she saw the name on the file. She simply worked. "You're going to need to rest your body, Mr. Carter," she said without looking up. "Whatever you're managing out there, it will still be there after your nervous system recovers." "I'll rest," I said, "when I know what's happening inside my own company." Sarah looked up from the clipboard then. She studied my face for a moment with those steady, unreadable eyes. Then, she said, "You're going to need me to stay." Robert Hayes walked into my hospital room on the afternoon of October 24th, looking like a man who had not slept in 3 days, which, knowing Robert, probably meant he hadn't. He was 63 years old, with the posture of someone who had spent a career standing firm in rooms that were trying to push him out. He set his briefcase on the chair beside my bed, shook my hand the way he always did, firm like the ritual mattered regardless of circumstances, and looked me over with the appraising eye of a man who has watched another man weather hard things before. "You look better than I expected," he said. "Low bar," I said. He almost smiled. Then he pulled the chair close and sat down, and the fact that he didn't open the briefcase immediately told me everything. Whatever he was about to say didn't belong in documents yet. It belonged in the air between two men who had known each other long enough to speak plainly. "Talk to me, Robert," I said. He folded his hands on his knee, a habit he had when organizing difficult thoughts, and looked at me directly. "Daniel, before we go any further, I need to show you something." He reached into the briefcase and produced a single folder. Not thick, not dramatic, just a manila folder with a court filing stamp on the upper left corner. He set it on my tray table and opened it. I looked at the document inside. My eyes moved down the first page, slowly reading the header, the case number, the petitioner's name. Emily Carter Walsh. The filing was dated 3 weeks before my accident. My chest went very still. Not the stillness of shock, the stillness of a man whose body already understands something, before his mind has finished processing it. I read the header again. "In re-petition for determination of incapacity, Daniel James Carter." "She filed this before I was injured," I said. My voice came out flat and stripped of everything. "Yes." Robert's voice was careful and deliberate. "Under Texas Estates Code Section 1101, a petitioner must obtain confirmation from 2 independent physicians before the probate court can act on an incapacity claim. She had 1 physician lined up already. She needed a triggering event, a documented medical crisis, to pursue the second." The air in the room felt different suddenly. Thicker. "She knew the site had problems," I said. "That is the logical conclusion." I pressed the back of my hand hard against my mouth. My eyes were burning, not from grief, not yet, but from the particular fury of a man who has just seen the shape of something he should have seen coming and didn't. My jaw tightened until I could feel it in my temples. "She didn't come to the hospital," I said. My voice cracked slightly on the last word, and I stopped. Pressed my lips together, forced myself to breathe through it. "She filed this 3 weeks ago, and then she waited. She was waiting for me to be weak enough." "Daniel, how long has she been planning this?" My voice came out harder than I intended, scraped raw. "The petition, the timing, all of it, how long?" Robert exhaled slowly. "That's exactly what Michael needs to find out, which is why I've already given him full access to the financial records as of this morning." He paused. "But Daniel, there's something else. Michael called me on the drive here. He said he found something in the company books that he needs to show you in person. He wouldn't tell me what it was over the phone." I stared at him. In 25 years, Michael Grant had never refused to discuss something over the phone. He was the kind of man who delivered bad news directly and without ceremony because he believed that delay was its own form of dishonesty. If Michael Grant wouldn't say it over the phone, it was because saying it out loud even to Robert felt like detonating something he wasn't ready to detonate until he was standing in the same room as me. Near the window, Sarah had gone very still. Her hands had stopped moving on the clipboard she'd been holding, though she didn't turn around. She was giving me the only privacy the room allowed. "Robert," I said, "whatever it is, don't soften it." He picked up the folder from my tray table, closed it, and held my gaze with the steady eyes of a man who had known me long enough to understand the warning wasn't necessary. But he appreciated it anyway. "Michael will be here tomorrow morning," he said. "Early." After Robert left, I lay back against the pillow and stared at the ceiling. My knee throbbed beneath its layers of bandaging. The monitor beside me beeped its patient rhythm. And somewhere behind my sternum, in the place where I had carried Margaret's absence for 4 years, like a stone I'd learned to walk with something new, was settling in colder and sharper and harder to name. Sarah set the clipboard down on the desk and crossed to the side of my bed. She didn't touch my hand. She wasn't that kind of person, and I wasn't that kind of man. But she stood close enough that her presence registered steady and real. "What do you need right now, Mr. Carter?" she asked. Not "how are you feeling?" Not "I'm so sorry." Just the question that actually mattered. I took a long breath. "I need to know what Michael found," I said. "And I need my knee to stop feeling like it's full of broken glass so I can think straight." The corner of her mouth moved, not quite a smile, but close enough. "I can help with one of those," she said, and reached for the medication panel. 3 days into my recovery, I had developed a habit of watching Sarah work. Not in any way she would have noticed, or if she noticed, she gave no sign of it. I watched the way she moved through the room with the economy of someone who had learned long ago that efficiency was its own form of respect. No wasted motion, no performance. She checked my vitals at the same intervals every morning, adjusted the angle of my leg elevation, by degrees so small I wouldn't have thought they mattered, until she explained once plainly, without being asked, that swelling in a reconstructed joint responds to gravity the way water responds to a slope. Small adjustments compounded over hours make the difference between a good recovery and a complicated one. She was the kind of person who understood that details were not small things wearing a small costume. They were the whole thing. On the morning of the 3rd day, she put me through my first physical therapy session. The therapist, a solid, cheerful man named Marcus, who talked too much and meant well, guided me through the initial weight-bearing exercises with the careful optimism of someone who had learned to celebrate small victories because large ones took time. I was not good at small victories. My right knee buckled the first time I tried to shift my weight from the bed to the chair beside it. My arms shook. My jaw clenched so hard I felt it in my back teeth. A sound came out of me that I was not proud of, low and guttural, the sound a man makes when his body refuses an order his mind has already given twice. "That was bad," Sarah said from where she stood near the door. Marcus shot her a look. Sarah didn't acknowledge it. "Thank you for the honesty," I managed through teeth that were still pressed together. "You'll do better tomorrow," she said. "You did worse yesterday in pre-op assessment, so the trend is moving in the right direction." I burst out laughing, a short, sharp sound that surprised even me and sent a bolt of pain through my ribs that I absolutely deserved. It was the first time I had laughed since before the accident, and it hurt, and it felt like something I had needed without knowing it. Marcus looked between us, decided he didn't understand what was happening, and wisely said nothing. That night, the 3rd night, I woke at 2 a.m, with pain radiating from my knee up through my hip and into my lower back. The deep structural ache of a body that has been taken apart and is not yet reconciled to the process of being put back together. I lay there in the dark, staring at the ceiling, whilst running through numbers in my head, the way I always did when I couldn't sleep. Project timelines, contract values, the particular arithmetic of a company I had spent 30 years building, piece by careful piece. But the numbers kept sliding away, and what replaced them in the dark and the quiet was Emily's voice. "That's what they're for, Dad." Sarah was at the small desk near the window, writing in my medication log under the light of a small lamp. She looked up the moment I stirred, before I had made any deliberate sound, before I had shifted more than a fraction of an inch. "Scale of 1 to 10, she said quietly, already reaching for the call panel. 7, I said. She looked at me. Honest answer or tough guy answer? My chest tightened at that, not from the pain, but from something else entirely. 8.5, I said. She adjusted my medication timing, repositioned the pillow beneath my knee with hands that were steady and sure, and pulled the blanket straight across my chest. Small, practical kindnesses from someone who understood that comfort lives in the details. "You don't have to pretend it doesn't hurt," she said. "Old habit," I said. She sat back down at her desk, but she was still facing me, and the lamp between us cast just enough light that I could see her expression clearly attentive, without pity, without the careful over-warmth that people manufactured when they didn't know what else to offer. "My wife used to say I treated pain like an inconvenience to be managed," I said. The words came out before I had decided to say them, the way things do at 2 in the morning, when the defenses a man builds during daylight hours have gone quiet. She said I needed to learn the difference between ignoring something and actually dealing with it. Sarah's pen stopped moving. "She sounds like she knew you well, better than I deserved." My throat tightened around the words in a way I hadn't expected. "She passed 4 years ago. Margaret, cancer." I stopped, pressed my lips together. She would have been here. From the first hour. She would have driven herself through morning traffic and set up camp in that chair, and driven every nurse on this floor, half crazy with questions, until she was satisfied that every person touching me knew exactly what they were doing. Sarah's expression shifted not with pity, which I could not have tolerated, but with something more careful. Something that looked like recognition. "My father was sick for 2 years before he passed," she said. Her voice was level, but I could hear the weight underneath it. The kind of weight that doesn't go away with time, only becomes more familiar. "I was there every day I could manage." She paused. "Some days I think about how different it might have looked if he'd had the right support around him." I looked at her then. Really looked at her past the clipboard and the scrubs and the professional composure she wore like a second skin. There was something underneath all of it. Something she was carrying that she hadn't put down. "Is that why you do this work?" I asked. She considered the question seriously, the way she considered everything. "Partly," she said. "And partly because people who are going through the hardest moments of their lives deserve to be seen as more than what's happening to them." Something cracked quietly in my chest at that. Not broke cracked. The way old wood does when warmth finally reaches it after a long, cold season. "Sarah," I said carefully, "why did you request this hospital specifically? You could work anywhere in Houston." Something shifted in her face, barely a half-second thing. A question landing closer to home than expected. She answered smoothly enough. She had trained here, knew the systems well, trusted the surgical team. All true things I sensed, but not the whole truth. She straightened her scrubs and moved toward the door. "Get some rest, Mr. Carter," she said. "Tomorrow is going to be a long day." She was right. But I lay awake long after she turned back to her desk, turning her answer over in my mind, like a stone with something written on the other side that I hadn't yet found the angle to read. On the fifth night, I called Pastor Jim Ellison at 10:30 in the evening. I didn't explain why. I just said his name and the room number, and Jim, who had known me for 20 years, and understood that Daniel Carter did not make late-night phone calls unless something had broken loose inside him that daylight couldn't hold, said, "I'll be there in 40 minutes." He arrived at 11 still wearing his jacket from an evening service, his gray hair slightly disheveled, carrying nothing but himself. He pulled the chair close to my bed, sat down without ceremony, and looked at me with the patient, unhurried eyes of a man who had learned that the most useful thing you can offer someone in pain is simply your presence. "Talk," he said. So I did. I told him about the petition Emily had filed 3 weeks before the accident. I told him about Ryan's laughter on the phone. I told him about lying in this room for 5 days without a single visit from my own daughter. And then I told him the thing I hadn't been able to say out loud to anyone, not to Robert, not to Michael, not even to Sarah, in the quiet dark of 2 in the morning. "Margaret tried to tell me," I said. My voice cracked on her name, and I stopped, pressed the back of my hand hard against my mouth until I had control of it again. "The year Emily married Ryan." Margaret pulled me aside after the rehearsal dinner and said, "Daniel, I need you to really look at that man, not at who you want him to be, at who he actually is." I exhaled slowly. I told her she was being too hard on him, that she'd come around. Jim's expression didn't change. He just listened the way good listeners do, like your words actually matter to the air they enter. "She never said it again," I continued. "Not once in 11 years. She just watched. And she loved Emily the way Margaret loved everyone, which was completely and without conditions. But she knew." My eyes were burning badly now. I blinked hard twice. "She knew Jim, and I chose not to hear her, and now she's gone and I can't even tell her she was right." Jim leaned forward then and put his hand on my forearm. His grip was firm and warm, the grip of a man who understood that some moments don't need words, they need weight. "Do you want me to pray?" he asked. I hadn't been inside a church with any regularity since Margaret's funeral, but I nodded. Because at 10:30 at night, in a hospital room with a destroyed knee and a daughter who had filed legal papers to have me declared incompetent, I had run out of arguments against it. Jim prayed in a low, unhurried voice. When he finished, we sat together in the easy quiet of 2 men who had known each other long enough that silence between them was never uncomfortable. It was just another form of conversation. "What are you going to do?" Jim asked finally. I looked out the window at the Houston skyline, lit up and indifferent and beautiful in the way that large cities are beautiful, which is to say, completely unaware of you. "What I've always done," I said. "Build something back." Jim nodded slowly. Then before he stood to leave, he said something that stopped me cold. "Daniel Tyler called me last week." He paused. "He asked me whether it was wrong to keep a secret to protect someone you love." My chest tightened. "What did you tell him?" Jim looked at me steadily. "I told him it depends entirely on who you're protecting them from." He left. And I lay in the dark, turning those words over and over, feeling something shift in my chest. Something that felt less like dread and more like the particular alertness of a man who has just understood that the help he needed was already closer than he knew. Michael Grant arrived at 7:15 in the morning, before the breakfast trays came around, and before the day shift had fully settled into its rhythm. He was 57 years old, salt and pepper hair combed back neatly, wearing a charcoal blazer, with no tie, the uniform of a man who had come to work but hadn't bothered pretending it was a normal day. He crossed the room and shook my hand the way he always had, firm and direct, no wasted motion. You look like you haven't slept, I said. I haven't, he said, pulling the chair close and setting his laptop on the tray table. Neither have you, so we're even. He opened the screen without preamble. Daniel, I need to show you something before we talk about the financial audit. Something I found inside the internal email system after Robert's team locked down access. He turned the laptop to face me. On the screen was an email chain. The sender name at the top made me go very still. Frank Doyle. I had known Frank for 20 years. He had started with Carter Infrastructure as a junior site supervisor back when I was still doing half the inspections myself, and he had grown into one of the best construction foremen in the state of Texas, a man who understood that a building was only as honest as the people who put it together. I had trusted him with sites worth tens of millions of dollars. I had trusted him with my name. Read the subject line, Michael said. I read it. Urgent safety concern, Site 7 structural support. The date was October 14th, 9 days before my accident. My jaw tightened as I read Frank's words. He had written to Ryan Walsh directly, clear, specific, professional. The scaffolding on floors 3 through 5 of Site 7 did not meet load-bearing standards under OSHA Regulation 29 CFR 1926. He had identified 3 specific anchor points that were inadequately secured. He was formally requesting an immediate halt to construction pending independent structural inspection. At the bottom of the email, a small icon indicated the message had been read. The timestamp showed 9:14 in the morning on October 14th. Ryan Walsh had opened that email at 9:14 in the morning, 9 days before the scaffolding collapsed on top of me. There was no reply. Keep scrolling, Michael said quietly. The next email in this chain was from Carter Infrastructure's Human Resources System, dated October 15th, the morning after Frank's warning. Subject line, Notice of Employment Termination. Frank Doyle, Site Operations Manager. Reason listed, performance issues. The air went out of the room. My hand came down flat on the mattress, hard, deliberate, the way you put your hand down when you need something solid beneath you, because everything else has just shifted. My chest felt like it was being compressed from both sides simultaneously, and I had to breathe carefully through my nose, counting the seconds between inhale and exhale, because the alternative was saying something I couldn't take back. He read it, I said. My voice came out low and stripped to the bone. Ryan read Frank's warning at 9 in the morning, and by the next day, Frank was gone. Yes, Michael said. He wasn't looking at the screen anymore. He was looking at me with the careful expression of a man who understood exactly what he had just put in front of another man and was giving him space to absorb it. Frank has been out of work for 3 weeks, Michael continued. I reached him last night. He said he's been sitting on something since the day he was let go, a photograph he took of the scaffolding before he cleared out his truck. Timestamp and everything. I want to meet him, I said immediately. I know. Robert's already arranging it. Michael paused, his fingers resting on the edge of the laptop. Daniel, that's not all. The independent audit team finished their preliminary sweep of the other active sites this morning. He held my gaze steadily. 3 of the 7 sites have the same structural deficiencies as Site 7. 2 of them are partially occupied. The words landed like something physical. A blow absorbed not by the body, but by the part of a man that has spent his entire adult life promising people that what he built would not hurt them. People were living inside buildings held up by steel that Ryan Walsh had approved, knowing it was wrong. Stop every site, I said. My voice came out harder and quieter than I intended the voice I used when a decision had already been made, and what remained was simply execution. All 7. Today. I don't care what it costs in contract penalties. Pull the crews, lock the gates, And don't let anyone back on those sites until every structural element has been independently certified. Michael nodded once. He was already reaching for his phone. "And Michael," I said. He looked up. "Tell Robert I want Frank Doyle in this room as soon as possible. Whatever he has, I need to see it." Michael closed the laptop, and looked at me with the expression of a man who had worked beside me long enough to know when I had made a decision that wasn't going to change. "There's more, Daniel," he said. "The financial picture, the numbers we thought we were looking at, may not be complete. Nora Vance reached out to Robert this morning. She says she's been holding on to something for 3 months, and she can't hold it any longer." He walked out. And I lay there in the thin October light coming through the hospital window, thinking about Frank Doyle writing that email, careful, professional, doing exactly what a man of his experience and integrity was supposed to do, and the silence that had come back to him in return. 20 years of good work. 1 email. Gone by morning. Emily came on the 9th day. Not at visiting hours. Not with a phone call ahead of time. She simply appeared in the doorway of my room at 10:15 in the morning, dressed in a charcoal blazer and pressed slacks, her dark hair pulled back the way she wore it for board presentations. She was carrying flowers, white ones, the kind you bring to a funeral when you want to look like you care without committing to color. I watched her cross the room and felt something move through my chest that I hadn't expected. Not anger, not yet, but the particular ache of a father looking at his daughter and seeing for the first time with complete clarity that the person walking toward him was a stranger wearing a familiar face. "Dad." She leaned down and kissed my cheek. Her perfume was the same one she'd worn since college. That detail hurt more than I expected it to. "You look better than I thought you would." 9 days will do that," I said. She set the flowers on the windowsill and pulled the chair close, not too close, I noticed. Exactly the right distance for a conversation you've rehearsed. She folded her hands in her lap and looked at me with an expression of careful concern, the kind that has been assembled rather than felt. "How's the pain?" she asked. "Manageable," I said. "How's the contract?" A flicker crossed her face, gone before it fully formed. "Closed," she said. "Successfully. Good." She asked about my physical therapy. She asked about my sleep. She asked about my appetite. All the right questions in the right order, with the right pauses between them. It was a performance, and it was a good one, and it made my chest ache with a grief I had no name for yet. Then she asked to speak with my doctor. Sarah was in the room when Emily approached Dr. Patricia Simmons near the door, close enough to hear, professional enough to give no sign that she was listening. Dr. Simmons was 48 years old, direct and unhurried, the kind of physician who had earned the right to say difficult things plainly, because she had spent 20 years saying them accurately. Emily handed her a document. I could not read it from where I lay. But I watched Dr. Simmons's face as she read it, and I watched the precise moment her expression shifted from professional neutrality to something considerably cooler. "Ms. Carter Walsh." Dr. Simmons said, her voice carrying the particular quiet authority of someone choosing words with surgical care. "Your father had orthopedic surgery on his knee. His cognitive function is completely intact. I will not sign this." Emily's chin lifted slightly. "Dr. Simmons, I understand your hesitation, but given the stress of the situation and the medications involved, there are legitimate questions about his capacity to make complex financial." "There are no such questions from a medical standpoint." Dr. Simmons set the document on the counter beside her, face down, with the finality of something being permanently set aside. "Your father is oriented, articulate, and making decisions that are entirely consistent with someone in full possession of their faculties. Under Texas Estates Code, an incapacity determination requires confirmation from two independent physicians. I would not be the first, and I would not recommend you pursue the second. She paused. I think this conversation is finished. Emily's jaw tightened so hard I could see the muscle flex beneath her cheekbone. She picked up the document, smoothed it once against her portfolio, and walked back to my bedside. She stood there for a moment, looking at Mong, and for just 1 second, one unguarded, unrehearsed second, something moved across her face that looked almost like grief, like a person standing at the edge of something they have already decided to do and feeling too late the full weight of what it costs. Then it was gone. I'll call you this week, Dad, she said. She kissed my cheek again. Same perfume, same careful distance. She walked out without looking back. I stared at the white flowers on the windowsill for a long moment. A memory surfaced without warning. Emily, at 8 years old, standing in the doorway of Margaret's hospital room, after a minor procedure holding a fistful of wildflowers she'd picked from the yard stems, uneven petals already wilting. I picked the colorful ones, Mama, because white ones look sad. That little girl had known something the woman in the charcoal blazer had forgotten entirely. Sarah crossed to my bed and stood close enough that I could feel her presence steady and real. She didn't come to see me, I said. My voice came out rougher than I intended, scraped down to something raw. She came to finish a task. I know, Sarah said. She didn't soften it. She didn't redirect it. She just said it plainly, the way true things deserve to be said. She brought white flowers, I said. Sarah glanced at the windowsill. I noticed. Margaret hated white flowers in hospitals, I said. She said they looked like giving up. Sarah looked at me for a moment. Really looked at me with those calm, direct eyes that never flinched from what they found. Robert called while Emily was here, she said quietly. He says Nora Vance is ready to talk, and Frank Doyle is driving up from Galveston first thing tomorrow morning. She paused. He says he has a photograph. On the 11th night, I asked her directly. It was late past midnight, the hospital corridor outside reduced to the occasional soft footstep and the distant hum of the elevator. Sarah was updating my medication log at the small desk near the window, and I had been lying there for an hour staring at the ceiling, turning the same question over and over until I couldn't justify holding it anymore. Sarah, I said, why this hospital? She didn't answer immediately. She set her pen down slowly, deliberately, and turned in her chair to face me. Something shifted in her expression. Not quite pain. The thing that lives just underneath pain after you've carried it long enough that it stops surprising you. My father's name was James Bennett, she said. Does that mean anything to you? It didn't. Not at first. And then something moved through my chest, cold and quiet, like water finding a crack in old concrete. He was a construction worker. She continued, her voice steady, in the way that voices get when the person speaking has rehearsed the words so many times, the emotion has been worn smooth. In 2012, he was killed on a Carter infrastructure job site in San Antonio. A scaffolding collapse. She paused. The same mechanism as your accident. My mouth went dry. The company settled outside of court, she said. A confidentiality agreement. My mother signed it because she had 3 kids and no income, and the alternative was a legal fight she couldn't afford. Sarah's hands were folded in her lap, but I could see her knuckles had gone pale. I was 28. I didn't sign anything. The monitor beside me beeped its steady rhythm. Outside Houston continued its indifferent business. Inside this room, I felt the full weight of 12 years pressing down on my chest like something physical. In 2012, I said carefully, I received an incident report. My operations team told me it was a random workplace accident. Equipment failure. I stopped. I believed them. I signed the settlement authorization, and I moved on. My voice dropped to almost nothing. I never asked a single follow-up question. Sarah looked at me steadily. Her eyes were bright but dry, the eyes of someone who had already done their crying alone a long time ago and had come here for something different. "I know," she said. "That's actually why I'm still here." "Then why come at all?" My chest was so tight I had to push the words through it carefully, one at a time. "Why take care of the man who—" "Because I needed to know which man you were," she said. "The one who built something real and stopped paying attention, or the one who knew exactly what was happening and chose profit anyway." She held my gaze without flinching. "Those are two very different men, Mr. Carter." My eyes were burning. I pressed my fist against the center of my chest and held it there hard because the alternative was coming apart in a way I wasn't ready for. "I didn't know," I said. "But not knowing, because I didn't ask, is its own kind of answer." Sarah nodded once. She didn't absolve me. She didn't tell me it was okay. She just nodded because it was true, and we both knew it, and sometimes the most honest thing two people can do is agree on a hard fact without dressing it up. "What happens next," she said quietly, "is the part that matters." The next morning, Frank Doyle appeared in my doorway at 7:45, 55 years old, broad-shouldered, wearing a jacket that had seen better decades. He shook my hand with a grip that told me everything about the kind of man he was, and reached into his jacket pocket and produced his phone. He pulled up a photograph. Time-stamped October 15th, 2:47 in the afternoon, the day after he sent his warning email to Ryan. The day he was fired. The image showed the scaffolding on Site 7's third floor. Even to my non-engineering eye, the missing anchor points were obvious. "I took it before I pulled out of the lot," Frank said, his jaw tight, his eyes hard, with something that had been sitting in him for 3 weeks. "I knew somebody was going to need it someday." I looked at the photograph for a long moment. Then I looked at Frank Doyle, a man who had done the right thing, been punished for it, and driven down from Galveston through morning traffic to make sure the truth had somewhere to land. "Frank," I said, "when this is over, I want you back. Not as site manager, as director of construction safety, a position that answers directly to me." Frank stared at me. His throat moved. "Tell me what you need me to do right now," he said, his voice rough at the edges. "And I'll do it." Michael spread the audit folders across my tray table with the careful deliberateness of a man who understood that what he was about to say could not be unsaid and wanted to make sure he said it in the right order. Frank Doyle sat in the corner of the room, arms crossed, jaw set. He had stayed at my request. I wanted him to hear this. He had earned the right to understand the full shape of what his email had tried to prevent. "I'm going to walk you through all of it," Michael said. "Don't stop me until I'm finished." I nodded. He began with the contractors. Over the past 2 years, 14 shell companies had been created and registered across Texas, Oklahoma, and Louisiana, each one designed to look like a legitimate subcontractor, each one existing for an average of 8 months before being quietly dissolved. They had names that sounded real. They had addresses that were mail forwarding services. They had invoices, purchase orders, and payment records. All of it fabricated. All of it run through Carter Infrastructure's accounts as standard operational costs. The materials those phantom companies supposedly supplied had been replaced on-site with cheaper alternatives. Steel rated for structural load-bearing ASTM A36 grade had been swapped for a lower classification that met neither the original design specifications nor Houston's municipal building code. The concrete mix used on 3 of the 7 active sites was formulated at a compressive strength roughly 30% below what the structural engineering drawings required. The difference between what was billed and what was actually purchased went somewhere. Michael pulled up a second document. 46 wire transfers over 19 months, he said, routed through the shell companies into 2 private accounts. A property purchase on Lake Austin, $3.8 million, vehicle acquisitions, and this. He turned the laptop to show me a transaction history that made my stomach drop. $9.2 million moved into cryptocurrency investment platforms over 18 months. Current value of those holdings approximately $400,000. Frank Doyle made a sound in the corner of the room, low involuntary, the sound a man makes when something confirms his worst suspicions, and he takes no satisfaction whatsoever in being right. The Ponzi structure, Michael continued, worked like this. Every new project that came in was used to service the cash shortfall created by the previous round of theft. The company's receivables looked healthy from the outside. The internal reserves were being hollowed out from the inside. He paused. Daniel, if you had not walked onto Site 7 on October 21st, Carter Infrastructure had approximately 4 to 5 months before it became insolvent. The creditors would have been at the door before the board understood what was happening. I pressed my hand flat against the mattress. The fabric was rough under my palm, and I focused on the physical reality of it, because the alternative was letting the full enormity of what Michael was describing land all at once, and I needed to stay functional. 40 years. 40 years of early mornings and impossible deadlines and handshakes with men who trusted Carter Infrastructure because I had given them every reason to. My father's advice on the day I started the company, delivered over coffee at his kitchen table in Beaumont, Daniel, your name goes on every wall you build. Make sure you'd be proud to see it there. They had put my name on walls held up by steel that wasn't strong enough to hold them. How many occupied buildings? I asked. My voice came out steadier than I felt. 2 confirmed, Michael said. Robert has already contacted the city's building inspection office. Emergency structural reviews are being scheduled. Good. I looked at Frank. He was staring at the floor, his jaw working, his eyes red at the corners, with something that wasn't quite tears, but lived in the same neighborhood. Frank, I said. He looked up. None of this is on you. You wrote that email. You did exactly what 20 years of experience told you to do. Frank's throat moved. He pressed his lips together hard and nodded once, the nod of a man holding himself together through sheer force of will. There's more, Michael said. He closed the first folder and placed his hand on the second, the one he hadn't opened yet. The 26 million we've traced so far. That may not be the complete picture. Nora Vance, I said. She's outside right now, Michael said. Robert brought her in 20 minutes ago. She drove herself here this morning. He paused. Daniel, she's been carrying something alone for 3 months. Whatever it is, she decided today was the day. I looked at the closed folder under Michael's hand. Then I looked at the door. Send her in, I said. Nora Vance walked in like a woman who had made a decision she couldn't unmake, and was walking toward the consequences of it with everything she had. She was 52 years old, dark hair streaked with gray, wearing a plain navy blazer over a white blouse. She was holding a manila folder against her chest, with both arms not tucked under one arm, the way you carry something routine but pressed flat against her sternum, the way you carry something you are afraid might disappear if you loosen your grip. Her eyes were red at the corners. She had been crying recently, or close to it. But her chin was up and her back was straight, and that told me everything I needed to know about the kind of woman she was. Mr. Carter. Her voice was steady, though I could hear the effort underneath it. I've worked for this company for 18 years. I should have come to you sooner. I need you to know that I understand that. "Sit down, Nora," I said, "and tell me everything." She sat. She opened the folder, and she began. Ryan Walsh had approached her 14 months ago. Not directly at first, through suggestion, through implication, through the slow and careful application of pressure that men like Ryan used when they wanted something from someone they couldn't afford to confront openly. He needed certain quarterly reports, filed in a specific format. He needed certain disbursement records categorized differently than standard accounting practice dictated. He needed her signature on documents that described transactions she knew in her bones, did not reflect reality. When she hesitated, he reminded her gently, always gently, that her position had been restructured twice in the past 3 years, and that continued restructuring was always a possibility. When she pushed back, he mentioned offhandedly that the IRS had been known to take an interest in employees who created complications for their companies. She had signed. 6 times over 14 months, she had signed documents she knew were wrong. But every time, she said, and here her voice cracked for the first time a single fracture in the careful composure she'd built every single time before I signed the falsified version I printed the original. The real numbers. The real transaction records. She reached into the folder and placed a stack of documents on my tray table, 12 pages, each one stamped with Carter Infrastructure's internal accounting system and dated. I kept them at my house, in a fireproof box under my bed. Robert picked up the top sheet, and his eyes moved down the page rapidly. I watched his face change. "Nora," he said, his voice dropping to something careful and deliberate. "These records show 3 mortgage instruments filed against Carter Infrastructure commercial properties: the Westheimer Warehouse, the Katy Distribution Center, and the Memorial Office Building." He looked up at her. "These properties were pledged as collateral for private loans totaling $14 million. "Yes," Nora said. "The signature authorizing these transactions." Robert turned the page toward me. My own name looked back at me. Daniel James Carter, signed in ink on a document I had never seen in my life. The air in the room shifted. Frank Doyle straightened in his corner. Michael went very still. "That is not my signature," I said. The words came out low and absolutely certain, the voice of a man who has signed his name to enough documents over 40 years to know exactly what his signature looks like, and exactly what it does not. "No," Nora said. "It isn't." Her knuckles were white around the edge of the folder. "I contacted an attorney through an anonymous consultation attorney-client privilege about 8 weeks ago. He advised me to wait until I had enough to make the case unambiguous before going to anyone. He told me that if I moved too early and Ryan had time to destroy records, we might lose everything." Her voice dropped. "And then you got hurt. And I knew I couldn't wait anymore." "You kept these documents alone for 3 months," I said. "Under your bed." "I didn't know who to trust." Her voice broke all the way open on the last word, not a sob, but the sound of a woman who has been carrying an impossible weight in complete isolation and has just been given permission to set it down. Her eyes filled, and she pressed her lips together hard, blinking fast. "I'm sorry it took me this long, Mr. Carter. I am so sorry." My chest ached with something that wasn't anger and wasn't grief, but contained pieces of both. I looked at this woman, 18 years of honest work, 14 months of fear, 3 months of a secret kept under her bed in a fireproof box, and I felt the particular fury of a man who understands exactly what it costs ordinary people when the people above them choose corruption. "Nora," I said, "you did the right thing. Do you hear me?" She looked at me, eyes wet, chin still up. "You did the right thing." She pressed her hand flat over her mouth. Her shoulders shook once, just once, and then she pulled herself back together with the quiet dignity of someone who has been strong for a very long time and knows how to keep going. Robert was already on his feet. Daniel, the forged signatures on these mortgage documents constitute forgery under federal statute 18 U.S.C. 513. Combined with the wire fraud from the shell company transactions, this moves the entire case into federal criminal jurisdiction. He paused. We need the FBI. I know, I said. I already made a call this morning, Robert said. There's an agent, Derek Simmons, FBI Houston field office. He's been watching Ryan Walsh independently for 4 months. He wants to meet. Robert looked at me steadily. He says what we have will give him Emily, too. Robert called me at 9 that evening from his car. Simmons just left my office, he said without preamble. Daniel, I need to walk you through what he told me. All of it. Go ahead. I heard him exhale the slow, controlled exhale of a man organizing a large amount of information into the right sequence. Outside my hospital window, Houston was doing what it always did at night. Blazing and indifferent 10,000 lives happening simultaneously, at altitude none of them aware of this room or what was being built inside it. Agent Derek Simmons has been with the FBI's Houston field office for 16 years, Robert began. For the past 4 months, he's been running an independent investigation into a pattern of construction fraud across the state of Texas. Multiple companies, multiple sites, a network of shell contractors, moving money through interstate wire transfers. He paused. Ryan Walsh is one of 7 individuals currently under active federal scrutiny. How long has he known about Ryan specifically? Since July. He identified the shell company structure through a routine financial intelligence sweep, the kind the FBI runs on wire transfer patterns that cross state lines. Under 18 U.S.C. 1343, any fraudulent scheme that uses electronic wire communication across state boundaries falls under federal jurisdiction. Ryan's transfers to the Louisiana and Oklahoma shell companies gave Simmons everything he needed to open a full investigation. I pressed my free hand flat against the blanket. Why hasn't he moved already? Because he wants Emily. Robert's voice was careful and precise. He has enough on Ryan to arrest him tonight if he chose to. But Emily's involvement, the incapacity petition, the physician pressure, the coordination of the plan, that requires a different evidentiary standard. He needs to show conspiracy, not just parallel action. A pause. What Nora brought today, the forged mortgage documents, the signature analysis, that's the bridge he's been missing. So he needs us, I said. He needs what you've built, yes, and he's willing to wait for it on one condition. Name it. He wants to be in this room when this is presented to the board, not as an arresting officer, as an observer whose presence signals to every board member that what they're hearing has the weight of a federal investigation behind it. Robert paused. He said, and I'm quoting him directly, "Tell Mr. Carter that we've been building this case for 4 months from the outside. He's been building it for 3 weeks from the inside. Together we don't have a gap." Something moved through my chest at that not quite satisfaction, but the particular clarity that comes when pieces that have been separate begin to find their alignment. I want to speak with him directly, I said. Tomorrow, here. He anticipated that. He'll be there at 8. Agent Derek Simmons arrived the next morning at 7:58, 2 minutes early, which told me something about him before he opened his mouth. He was 44 years old, medium build, wearing a dark blue suit that was good, but not expensive. He had the kind of face that didn't announce itself, the face of a man who had spent 16 years in rooms where the most useful thing you could be was someone people underestimated. He shook my hand without the over-firmness that people use when they want to establish authority, and pulled the chair close without being asked. "Mr. Carter," he said, "I'll be direct with you because I think that's what you prefer." "It is," I said. "Ryan Walsh is going to federal prison. That outcome is not in question." The question is whether Emily Carter Walsh goes with him, and for how long, and on what charges. He set a thin folder on the tray table, not opening it, just placing it there. What you've built in the last 3 weeks, the audit trail, the forged signatures, Nora Vance's documents, the email record that answers the conspiracy question. It shows coordination, not coincidence. And the camera footage, I asked. From Site 7, something shifted in his expression, the microscopic adjustment of a man who has just heard something he didn't expect. What camera footage? I looked at him steadily. Robert will brief you fully this afternoon, but I want you to understand something first, Agent Simmons. I leaned forward slightly, feeling the pull of my knee, ignoring it. I set a condition with Robert last night, and I'm setting it with you now directly. The FBI does not move, no arrests, no warrants served, until I have presented this evidence to my board of directors. The people who helped me build Carter infrastructure deserve to hear the truth from me before they hear it from a courtroom. Simmons studied me for a moment. His expression didn't change, but something behind his eyes did, the recalibration of a man who has just understood that the person across from him is not a victim waiting to be rescued. He was a partner with his own terms. How long do you need? He asked. 10 days, I said. Possibly less. He nodded once. 10 days, he said. Then we move. He stood, buttoned his jacket, and looked at me with the direct, assessing eyes of someone who respected what he saw, even if he hadn't expected to. Mr. Carter, in 20 years, I have never had a victim ask me to wait. I'm not a victim, I said. I'm the man who built this company, and I'm going to be the one who holds it accountable. Simmons picked up his folder. At the door, he paused and turned back. The camera footage, he said. Whatever it shows, make sure Robert gets it to me today. After he left, Sarah appeared in the doorway with 2 cups of coffee. She handed one to me without asking how I took it. She already knew after 11 days and looked at my face with those perceptive eyes of hers. You're ready, she said. Not a question. Getting there, I said. But first I need to see what's on that server. Before I show you what that security camera captured, comment the word camera below so I know you're still with me. What's on that footage will change everything you thought you understood about the morning of the accident. A note. This story contains fictional elements crafted for educational purposes. If that's not for you, it's completely okay to step away now. Michael arrived at 2 that afternoon with his laptop and an expression I hadn't seen on him before. Not alarm, not anger, but the particular gravity of a man who has watched something on a screen and understands that once another person sees it, nothing between them will be quite the same. He set the laptop on my tray table without a word, pulled the chair close, turned the screen to face me. The camera system you had installed in 2019, he said, runs on a dedicated server housed in the Site 7 equipment shed. Separate power supply, separate network, no connection to Carter Infrastructure's IT system. The only people who knew it existed were you and Frank Doyle. He paused. Emily and Ryan had no way of knowing it was there. Play it, I said. The footage was the grainy, washed-out gray of construction site security cameras. Fluorescent timestamps burned into the lower right corner in white digits. The date read October 21st. The location indicator read Site 7, Floor 3, North Scaffold Array. The timestamp read 6:47 in the morning. A figure appeared at the far edge of the frame. Male. Medium build. Dark jacket collar turned up against the early morning chill. He walked toward the camera with his hands in his pockets, and even through the degraded resolution, even before he was close enough for his face to be fully visible, I knew him. I had watched that walk for 11 years. Ryan Walsh moved along the fixed concrete walkway, connecting the third-floor access points, the permanent structural corridor that ran alongside the scaffolding, separate from the temporary framework itself. He stopped at the railing where the scaffolding joined the fixed platform. He reached out with one hand and gripped one of the vertical support poles extending from the scaffolding frame. He shook it. Once. Twice. Then he looked up. I watched his face in the footage, the slight tightening around his eyes, the almost imperceptible compression of his lips. The expression of a man who has just confirmed something he already suspected and is now deciding what to do with the confirmation. He let go of the pole. He put his hands back in his pockets, and he walked away. 7:31 Ryan's car left the site parking lot captured by the exterior camera at the gate. 7:52 my own truck appeared at the entrance. I watched myself on that screen, a version of me from 3 weeks ago, stepping out of the cab with my hard hat under my arm and my coffee thermos in hand, completely unaware of what was waiting for me on the third floor. 8:14, the timestamp froze. Then the camera shook. Then the frame went white with dust. Michael reached across and closed the laptop. The room felt like it had shrunk, the walls closer than before. The monitor beside me beeped its indifferent rhythm, and I wanted for one irrational moment to tear it off the wall. Sarah had crossed to my side of the room without my noticing. She didn't touch me. She understood I wasn't the kind of man who wanted to be held together by someone else's hands in hard moments. But she was standing close enough that I could feel her presence steady and real, and that was enough. He knew. My voice came out scraped down to the bare minimum 4 words, carrying the weight of everything I had been refusing to believe for 3 weeks. He stood there and shook that pole and looked up, and he knew. And then he walked to his car and drove home. Yes, Michael said. He wasn't looking at the laptop anymore. He was looking at me with the careful expression of a man who understands what he has just put in front of another man and is giving him the space to carry it. My hands were gripping the side rail of the hospital bed. I could feel the metal digging into my palms, and I didn't loosen my grip because the pressure was the only thing keeping me from saying something I couldn't take back. My knee throbbed beneath its bandaging. My jaw ached from clenching. Behind my eyes, something burned hot and insistent, and I blinked hard against it twice. He didn't call anyone, I said. He didn't send a text, didn't flag it, didn't leave a note with the foreman. My voice was rising slightly, and I pulled it back down deliberately, the way you rein in a horse that's beginning to bolt. He shook that pole, confirmed what Frank Doyle had already told him in writing 9 days earlier, and he chose to say nothing. Under Texas law, Michael said carefully, combined with his documented knowledge of the OSHA violations from Frank's email, this constitutes criminal negligence. The footage establishes both awareness and inaction. Agent Simmons needs to see this today. Send it to him, I said. Everything. The full footage, the timestamps, the metadata, all of it. I released the side rail and pressed my hand flat against the blanket, feeling my pulse hammering against the fabric. And tell Robert I want the board meeting scheduled. End of this week. Michael nodded, reaching for his phone. I looked at the closed laptop on my tray table. Somewhere on that hard drive, captured in grainy gray footage with a white timestamp, was the moment my son-in-law had decided that what he stood to lose was worth more than whatever might happen to me. I had built Carter infrastructure on the principle that what you put inside the walls was what mattered, that the materials you chose when no one was watching were the truest measure of who you were. Ryan Walsh had stood on my scaffolding and chosen to walk away. "Daniel," Sarah said quietly. I looked at her. Her eyes were steady and direct and full of something that wasn't pity and wasn't anger, but understood both. Robert called while Michael was setting up. Tyler reached out to him this afternoon. She paused. He says he has something he's been holding on to for 6 months. He wants to bring it to you himself. I had been home for 3 hours when Tyler came. Robert had called him that morning to let him know I was being discharged. I found that out later. Tyler had asked only one question: what time? The house felt strange after 3 weeks in a hospital room, too large, too quiet, full of the particular echo of a space that has been waiting for someone to return and isn't quite sure what to do now that they have. Margaret's photographs were still on the study wall. Her reading chair was still angled toward the window the way she liked it. Some things you don't move not because you're not ready, but because moving them would feel like agreeing to something you haven't agreed to yet. Sarah had helped me from the car to the front door, without making it feel like help, that particular skill of hers, making necessary things feel like choices. She had brewed coffee in Margaret's kitchen and was standing at the counter reading through my discharge notes when we heard the front door. Not a knock. A knock implies hesitation. This was 3 quick raps, urgent, deliberate, the knock of someone who has been rehearsing this moment for a long time and has decided that if they stop to think about it again, they won't go through with it. Sarah opened the door. Tyler Walsh was 16 years old and looked in that moment approximately 40. He was wearing a gray hoodie that had seen better semesters, jeans with a fraying hem, his dark hair uncombed. His eyes were red at the corners, not from crying right now, but from the accumulated evidence of nights that hadn't had enough sleep in them for a long time. He was carrying a backpack over one shoulder, and in his right hand, he held a USB drive so tightly that his knuckles had gone pale. He looked past Sarah and found me in the doorway of the study, standing with my hand on the frame and my cane beside me. "Grandpa." His voice was steady. It cost him something to make it steady, and I could see exactly what it cost. "Come in, Tyler," I said. "Come sit down." He crossed the room and sat in the straight-backed chair across from my desk, not the comfortable upholstered one, the wooden one. The choice of a person who doesn't feel entitled to comfort right now. He set the backpack on the floor and placed the USB drive on the desk between us, with both hands, the way you place something you've been guarding for a long time and are finally carefully letting go of. He looked at it for a moment. Then he looked at me. "I've been collecting things since May," he said. "Emails from my mom's laptop. She leaves it open in the kitchen when she's on calls and forgets I'm home. Texts from my dad's phone. He leaves it on the seat in the car when he runs into stores. Conversations I heard and recorded on my own phone." He held my gaze without flinching, though his jaw was working hard to stay still. "I didn't hack anything. I didn't break into anything. Everything I got was just open in my own house. Tyler, please let me finish." The firmness in his voice surprised me. Not rudeness, firmness. The voice of someone who has something to say and is afraid that if he stops, he won't start again. I closed my mouth and nodded. "I knew something was wrong," he said. "I didn't know exactly what, not at first. It sounded like business stuff, numbers, contracts, money moving around. I didn't understand enough to know if it was bad or just how business worked." His hands were pressed flat on his thighs now, and I could see his fingers trembling slightly against the denim. "But in September, I heard my dad on the phone with someone. He was talking about a site. He said—" Tyler stopped, swallowed. "He said the steel swap on Site 7 was saving them $400,000 on the contract, and nobody would know the difference until the building was occupied for a few years." The air went out of the room. "That's when I knew it wasn't just business," Tyler said. His voice had dropped to something quieter and more ragged. "That's when I understood that people could get hurt." He pressed his lips together hard. "And then you got hurt. And I—" His voice fractured completely, on the last word splitting apart like something that had been held under pressure for too long. His eyes filled all at once, not gradually, but suddenly, the way a dam gives way and the tears came down his face while he sat perfectly rigid in that straight-backed chair, hands flat on his thighs, refusing to collapse even while everything else did. I should have come sooner. I know that. I kept thinking Dad would stop on his own. I kept waiting for him to stop. I stood up from my chair. My knee screamed at me. The surgical site pulled tight and sent a bolt of heat up through my hip that made my vision blur for half a second. I didn't care. I crossed the 3 feet between us, put my hand on the back of my grandson's neck, the way I used to when he was small enough to carry, and felt him shudder once a single full-body tremor that he immediately tried to control and couldn't. "You did the right thing," I said. My voice came out rough and low and absolutely certain. "Do you hear me, Tyler? You did the right thing." He pressed his forehead against my shoulder and wept, not the careful, managed kind, but the deep, shaking, honest kind that comes from a place too far down for composure to reach. His shoulders heaved. His breath came in ragged pulls. 6 months of carrying something a 16-year-old should have to carry, breaking loose all at once in the study of a house that smelled like his grandmother's coffee. I held on. My knee was on fire, and I didn't move. When the worst of it passed, he pulled back and straightened in the chair, with the effortful dignity of a young man learning what it costs to do hard things. He wiped his face with the back of his hand and looked at me with eyes that were swollen and red and more grown up than they had any right to be. "Does anyone know you came here?" I asked. "I told them I was at baseball practice." "Good." I placed my hand briefly on his shoulder. "Keep going to baseball practice. Don't change anything about how you behave at home. Give them no reason to think anything has changed." I held his gaze. "Can you do that?" "Yes, sir." The formality of it, sir, told me how seriously he was taking this. I picked up the USB drive from the desk. It was warm from his grip. "Your grandmother," I said carefully, "would have been so proud of you." His face crumpled all the way, one completely honest moment every wall down, and then he pulled it back together with the particular effort of a young man who has decided that he is done falling apart today. He stood, straightened his hoodie, and looked at me with clear, steady eyes. Sarah appeared in the doorway with 2 glasses of water. She handed one to Tyler without a word, just handed it to him, naturally, like it was obvious, because with Sarah, everything necessary was obvious. He took it and drank, and some of the color came back into his face. "Tyler," I said. He looked up. "After this is over, all of it, you and I are going to sit down and talk about what comes next. For you, not for the company, for you," he nodded. And the small, careful hope that moved across his face in that moment was the most valuable thing anyone had given me since I woke up in that recovery room. After he left, I sat with the USB drive in my palm and looked at it for a long time. Sarah came to stand in the doorway of the study. "Call Robert," I said. "Tell him he needs to come tonight, and tell him to bring Michael." Sarah reached for her phone. Then she paused, reading the label Tyler had written in careful block letters on the side of the drive. "August emails," she read aloud. "RW to Dallas firm." She looked at me. "Do you know what that is?" My chest went very still. "Yes," I said. "I think I do." Robert arrived at 9 that evening with Michael behind him, and one look at both their faces told me they had not slept. Not the tired of men who had stayed up late. The tired of men who had been reading something that kept pulling them back to the screen every time they tried to stop, because each document they opened led to another one, and each answer generated 2 more questions, and by the time they understood the full shape of what they were looking at, the sky outside Robert's office window had already started going gray. Robert set his briefcase on my desk without opening it. That was how I knew. When Robert Hayes opened his briefcase first, It meant he had documents to walk through methodically. When he set it down closed, it meant what he needed to say came before the documents. It meant the documents were almost secondary to the thing he had to put into words first. He sat across from me. Michael took the chair near the window. Sarah stood in the doorway, present unobtrusive, the way she always was when something difficult was happening, and her presence mattered more than her participation. The USB, Robert said. Tyler collected 43 separate items over 6 months. Emails, text message, screenshots, 2 audio recordings made on his phone, and 1 video. He paused. Michael and I worked through all of it last night. We cross-referenced everything against the financial records Nora provided and the audit team's findings. He looked at me steadily. Daniel, the picture is complete, and it is worse than we understood. Show me, I said. Robert opened the briefcase then. He produced a printed email chain, 6 pages paper-clipped together, certain passages highlighted in yellow. He placed it on the desk in front of me. The emails were dated August, 3 months before my accident. The sender address was a personal Gmail account registered to Ryan Walsh, not his Carter infrastructure address, his personal one, the one he used when he didn't want a paper trail inside the company system. The recipient was a law firm in Dallas, Kavanaugh and Associates Attorneys at Law. I read the subject line. Inquiry removal of founding shareholder Private Texas Corporation. My jaw tightened. I kept reading. Ryan's first email was careful and indirect, the language of a man who had thought about how this correspondence might look later and had tried to build distance into every sentence. He described a hypothetical situation involving a privately held Texas corporation in which a founding shareholder had become, in his words, an obstacle to necessary operational evolution. He asked Kavanaugh and Associates to advise on the most efficient legal mechanisms available under Texas law to transition operational and financial control away from the founding shareholder. The response from Kavanaugh and Associates arrived within 48 hours. It was thorough and professional, and it made my blood run cold. The fastest available mechanism, the attorney wrote, was an incapacity declaration under Texas Estates Code. If the founding shareholder could be documented as lacking capacity to manage his personal and financial affairs, a court-appointed guardian, most likely a family member, could assume legal control within 30 to 60 days. The attorney noted that the process moved most efficiently when there was a documented medical event to anchor the capacity concerns, and suggested that proactive preparation of supporting documentation prior to any such event would significantly accelerate the timeline. Proactive preparation prior to any such event. I set the pages down on the desk. My hands were not shaking, which surprised me because everything inside my chest was. 3 weeks after this email exchange, I said Emily filed the incapacity petition. Yes, Robert said, and 6 weeks after this email exchange, the scaffolding on Site 7 came down. Robert held my gaze. The timing is not coincidental, Daniel. Whether or not Ryan intended the accident and the criminal negligence charge will address that. What is clear is that he was building a legal architecture to remove you before the financial fraud was discovered. The accident accelerated a plan that was already in motion. Michael leaned forward from his chair. There's one more thing from the USB. A text conversation between Ryan and Emily dated October 3rd, 18 days before the accident. He set his phone on the desk screen facing me. Emily asks Ryan if the petition paperwork is ready. Ryan says yes. Emily asks if they need the second physician lined up before or after. Ryan says after. He says, we just need the trigger. Once we have that, Simmons signs within a week. The name landed in the room like something dropped from a height. Simmons, I said. Not Agent Simmons, Robert said immediately. A different man entirely. We cross-referenced it this morning. Dr. Gerald Harmon, a physician in Katy who has had 2 prior complaints filed against him with the Texas Medical Board for signing documentation in exchange for payment. He paused. He was Ryan's second physician, already arranged, waiting for the trigger. My throat closed. I pressed my fist against the center of my chest and held it there hard, because the alternative was coming apart in a way that would not serve anyone in this room. They had arranged the physician before I was hurt. They had the legal framework prepared. They had the petition filed. All they needed was a medical event serious enough to make the incapacity claim credible, and they had been patient enough to wait for one to occur naturally, or to ensure that it did. Ryan knew the scaffolding was dangerous, I said. My voice came out very quiet. He knew from Frank's email. He confirmed it himself on the morning of the accident. He didn't cause it directly. I stopped, started again. But he made sure nothing stood in its way. That is what the criminal negligence charge will argue, Robert said. And with the footage, Frank's email, and now these texts, Agent Simmons has everything he needs to take it to the grand jury in December. I looked at the email pages on my desk, at Ryan's careful, indirect language, hypothetical situation, operational evolution, proactive preparation. The language of a man who believed he was clever enough to build a plan that couldn't be traced back to him. He had built it inside a house where his 16-year-old son kept better records than he did. Schedule the board meeting, I said. Thursday. I want it done before the weekend. Robert was already reaching for his phone. I'll have the notifications out tonight. And Robert. He looked up. Frank Doyle. I want him in that room. As a witness, as proof, I said that the right people were always there. We just weren't listening to them. Robert nodded. At the door, he paused. Agent Simmons called this afternoon while we were driving over. The grand jury convenes December 5th. He said, and I want you to hear this exactly, what happens in that boardroom Thursday will determine what we bring to them. Tell Mr. Carter to make it count. After they left, I sat in Margaret's study for a long time. The USB drive was on the desk in front of me, small, ordinary, the kind of thing you could buy at any drugstore for $8. Inside it, 6 months of a teenager's careful, frightened, courageous work. Sarah appeared in the doorway with coffee. She set a cup beside me and looked at my face with those direct eyes of hers. He did good, she said. He did, I said. My throat tightened on the words. He did everything right. She sat down across from me, not the professional posture, not the nurse posture, just a person sitting across from another person at the end of a very long day. Get some sleep tonight, she said. Thursday is going to require everything you have. She was right. For the first time in 3 weeks, I thought it might actually be possible. Before I walk you into that boardroom, drop "ready" in the comments and let me know you're still here. Because what Robert laid out on that walnut table, piece by piece, in front of 11 witnesses and a federal agent, it was 30 years of my life being accounted for in a single morning. This story includes fictional elements added for clarity and depth. Step away any time if it's not right for you. I had sat at the head of that boardroom table for 30 years. The table itself was a slab of dark walnut Margaret had helped me choose. In 1994, she had spent 45 minutes in the showroom, running her hand along different surfaces before she found the one she wanted, the one with the grain that caught the light at a particular angle and made the whole room feel like it meant something. I had argued that a table was a table. She had told me patiently and without any particular hurry that the things you build your decisions on top of matter more than people think. She had been right about that too. The morning of November 14th, I dressed in the vest Margaret had bought me the year we broke ground on our first commercial project, navy blue, slightly worn at the left pocket, from 30 years of pen clips and the most honest piece of clothing I owned. Sarah watched me button it from the doorway of the bedroom and didn't say anything, which was how I knew she understood. We arrived at Carter Infrastructure's Houston headquarters at 9:45. The lobby felt different than it always had: the same marble floors, the same brushed steel reception desk, the same photograph of the company's first completed building hanging beside the elevator. But the air carried something new. A particular tension, the kind that fills a space when people have already chosen sides and are waiting to see which side has the stronger hand. The boardroom was on the 14th floor. When the elevator doors opened, Robert was waiting in the corridor with his briefcase and the focused expression of a man who has spent the last 72 hours preparing for exactly this. Michael stood beside him. Frank Doyle stood near the window at the end of the hall, in a jacket and tie. The tie slightly crooked, the jacket slightly too formal, the whole ensemble of a man who had dressed with great care for something that mattered enormously to him. Agent Simmons stood apart from the others near the boardroom door, wearing his dark blue suit. He gave me a single nod. Sarah pushed my wheelchair through the boardroom doors. 11 board members were seated along the length of the walnut table. Men and women I had hired, mentored, argued with, trusted across decades of building something real. At the far end, Emily sat in a charcoal blazer with a leather portfolio in front of her, her spine straight, her expression carefully composed. Ryan sat beside her in a dark suit, one hand resting on the table, his eyes moving to me the moment I rolled through the door. Something crossed his face. I couldn't name it precisely, not quite fear, not quite calculation, but something between the two, the expression of a man rapidly reassessing a situation he had believed he controlled. I looked at him steadily. Then I looked away because he was no longer the most important person in this room. "Good morning," I said. My voice carried to every corner. It always had. "Let's get started." Robert called the meeting to order as acting chair. He had barely finished the procedural opening when he set his briefcase on the table and began. He did not raise his voice. He did not perform. He simply placed things on the table one after another with the quiet precision of a man who understands that the truth does not require decoration. The audit report first: $40+ million, 14 shell companies, materials substitutions across 7 active sites. He named the shell companies, their registration dates, their dissolution dates. He named the accounts. He named the amounts. Then the email. Frank Doyle's warning to Ryan Walsh, dated October 14th, 9 days before the accident. Robert read the subject line aloud. "Urgent safety concern, Site 7 structural support," and then looked up. "Mr. Doyle," he said, "would you confirm for the board that you authored this communication?" Frank stood. His jaw was set, and his eyes were steady, and his voice when he spoke carried the particular authority of a man who has nothing left to lose and therefore nothing to perform. "I wrote that email," he said. "I was terminated the following morning." Nobody at the table looked at Ryan. Robert advanced to the camera footage. The boardroom's presentation screen filled with the grainy gray image of Site 7's third-floor timestamp burning white in the corner. 6:47 in the morning, October 21st. The room watched Ryan Walsh walk across that screen, grip the scaffolding pole, look up, and walk away. I did not watch the screen. I watched the board members' faces, the precise moment, person by person, when they understood what they were seeing. The slight forward lean, the almost imperceptible intake of breath, the careful stillness of people absorbing something that cannot be unabsorbed. Ryan's hand on the table had tightened into a fist. Robert continued. "The incapacity petition filed 3 weeks before the accident. The email chain between Ryan and the Dallas law firm. The text messages between Ryan and Emily confirming the second physician arrangement. The forged mortgage documents, and here Robert produced the forensic document examiner's report, a 12-page analysis identifying 23 specific characteristics of the signatures that were inconsistent with Daniel Carter's authenticated samples across 3 decades. The conclusion of the forensic examiner, Robert said, sliding copies down the table, stated with a high degree of professional certainty, is that the signatures authorizing the mortgage instruments were not produced by Daniel Carter. Emily's leather portfolio was open in front of her, but she had stopped looking at it. She was looking at the table surface instead, her jaw tight, something moving behind her eyes that I couldn't quite read from where I sat. Ryan stood up. These documents have been selectively assembled to create a narrative that they have been verified, Robert said without raising his voice, by 3 independent parties: the construction audit firm, a certified forensic document examiner, and the Federal Bureau of Investigation. He looked at Ryan steadily. Agent Simmons, would you confirm the Bureau's involvement in this matter? Simmons stepped forward from his position near the wall. Carter Infrastructure has been the subject of an active federal investigation under 18 U.S.C. 1343 for the past 4 months, he said. The evidence presented this morning is consistent with and supplementary to that investigation. Ryan sat down. The movement was not voluntary. It was the movement of a structure losing its load-bearing support. Robert looked around the table. The board may now proceed to vote. The vote took 4 minutes. 11 members, 11 votes. Emily did not vote. As an executive officer under formal review, she had no standing to participate in the proceeding. She sat with both hands folded on the table in front of her, looking at nothing. Her face arranged into a stillness that I recognized not composure, but the thing that comes after composure has been exhausted. The stillness of someone who has arrived at the end of something and is not yet sure what comes next. Ryan stood when the result was announced. He buttoned his jacket with hands that were trembling visibly. I could see it from across the room. The fine, uncontrollable tremor of a man whose body has registered what his mind is still refusing. He walked out of the boardroom without speaking, without looking at me, without looking at anyone. I listened to his footsteps cross the marble corridor outside. I listened until I couldn't hear them anymore. Emily stood more slowly. She gathered her portfolio. At the door she paused and turned back and looked at me across the length of that walnut table, across 30 years of that room, and everything it had meant, and everything it no longer did. Her eyes were wet. Not crying the step before crime, crying the place where a person stands when they have decided they are not going to cry in front of people, and it is costing them considerably. I held her gaze. I did not look away. I had stopped looking away from things a long time ago. She turned and walked out. Agent Simmons appeared at my shoulder. Emily's attorney reached out to my office this morning, he said quietly. She wants to discuss a cooperation agreement. Ryan doesn't know yet. He paused. The grand jury convenes December 5th, Mr. Carter. We'll be in touch. After everyone had filed out, I sat alone at the head of the walnut table for a moment. The room was very quiet. The Houston skyline filled the windows, glass and steel and concrete, thousands of walls built by thousands of hands standing because the people who built them had put the right things inside them. Sarah appeared in the doorway. "Ready?" she asked. I looked at the table Margaret had chosen, at the grain that caught the light. "Yes," I said. "Let's go home." The plea hearing was scheduled for February 11th. 3 months had passed since the boardroom. 3 months of grand jury proceedings, federal interviews, and the particular grinding slowness of a justice system that moves at its own pace regardless of how urgently the people inside it want it to be over. Agent Simmons had kept Robert informed at every step. Emily had signed her cooperation agreement in December, 2 days after the grand jury returned its indictment on Ryan. Ryan had retained new counsel and entered a not guilty plea that his own attorneys, by all accounts, had advised against. Harris County Federal Courthouse on a February morning was gray and cold and smelled like floor wax and recycled air. Tyler sat beside me in the gallery. 17, now his shoulders broader than they'd been in November. Wearing a collared shirt, he'd clearly ironed himself because the collar was slightly crooked, in the way that things are when someone has tried very hard and gotten most of the way there. He had asked if he could come. I had said yes without hesitating. Robert sat at the attorney's table. Sarah sat on my other side, straight-backed, hands folded. She had not been required to be here. She had come anyway. Emily entered from the left with her attorney. She was dressed simply, dark blouse, no jewelry, hair down. The careful neutrality of someone who has been advised by counsel to present as human as possible. She did not look at the gallery when she came in. She sat at the table and placed her hands flat in front of her and looked at the middle distance with the focused stillness of someone running through something in her mind for the last time. Ryan entered from the right with his legal team. He looked older than he had in November. The 3 months had done something to his face, tightened it, sharpened it, hollowed it out, in ways that expensive suits couldn't conceal anymore. He glanced at Emily when he sat down. She did not look back. Judge Carol Whitman entered and the room rose. The prosecutor began presenting the terms of Emily's cooperation agreement. 18 months in federal custody. 3 years supervised release, full cooperation with the government's case against Ryan Walsh on all counts. In exchange, Emily would provide testimony regarding the planning and execution of the financial fraud, the incapacity petition, and the coordination of the physician arrangement. Ryan's lead attorney was on his feet before the prosecutor finished the third sentence. He objected to the characterization of his client's involvement, disputed the evidentiary basis, and requested additional time to respond to the cooperation terms. Judge Whitman overruled him with the brisk efficiency of a woman who had presided over federal hearings for 19 years and recognized a delay tactic when she saw one. That was when Emily stood up. Her attorney grabbed her arm. She pulled free, not violently, just with the absolute quiet certainty of someone who has made a decision that is not going to be unmade by another person's hand on her elbow. "Your Honor," she said. Her voice was steady, though I could hear the fracture running through it underneath, the way you can hear a crack in old plaster before you can see it. "I want to state for the record that the planning behind the incapacity petition and the financial restructuring was initiated and directed by Ryan Walsh. I signed documents he placed in front of me. I did not know the full extent of what those documents authorized." Ryan turned to look at her. His face had gone the color of old concrete. "Emily," he said. His attorney grabbed his arm. "I did not know he went to Site 7 the morning of the accident," she continued, her voice rising slightly now, the fracture widening. "I did not know he had seen the scaffolding and chosen to say nothing. I did not know that." Her chin was trembling. She pressed her lips together hard and kept going. "I have 2 children. I will not accept consequences for actions I did not take." Ryan pulled free of his attorney. "You knew everything." "Order." Judge Whitman's voice came down like a gavel before the gavel did. Ryan sat. His hands on the table were shaking, the fine, uncontrollable shaking of a man whose carefully constructed version of events has just been publicly dismantled by the one person he believed would never do it. Tyler's hand found mine in the gallery. His grip was tight and warm and 18 years old, and I held onto it with everything I had. I looked at Emily. She was standing with her chin up and her eyes wet, and her whole body vibrating with the effort of holding herself together in front of a federal judge and 40 strangers. She looked in that moment nothing like the woman who had walked into my hospital room with white flowers and a rehearsed expression. She looked like my daughter. The grief that shrinked through me then had no anger in it. It was clean and deep and very old, the grief of a father who has watched his child walk to the edge of something and go over it anyway, and who understands too late and too clearly every moment along the way where a different word or a different door might have led somewhere else entirely. Judge Whitman accepted Emily's cooperation statement into the record. Ryan's attorney was already requesting a recess. The room shifted around me, voices, movement, the shuffle of papers and chairs. Tyler leaned close. "Grandpa," his voice was very quiet. "Are you okay?" I looked at my daughter one last time as the bailiff guided her toward the side door. She paused at the threshold and turned back and found my face in the gallery. She didn't say anything. Neither did I. But she looked at me the way a person looks when they are trying to memorize something they are afraid they are about to lose, and I looked back at her the same way. Then the door closed. "I'm okay," I told Tyler. My voice came out rough and low and not entirely convincing. "I'm okay." Robert appeared at my shoulder. "Sentencing will be scheduled within 90 days for both of them. Ryan's attorneys have indicated he may reconsider his plea." He paused. "Daniel, when the time comes, the prosecutor wants to know if you'll make a statement." I watched the door Emily had walked through. "Yes," I said. "I will." The sentencing hearing was on a Thursday in September. Houston in September still carries summer in its bones, the heat pressing down on the courthouse steps, like something that hasn't gotten the message yet that the season is supposed to be changing. Tyler held the door for me as I walked in on my own 2 feet. No wheelchair, no cane. My knees still ached on cold mornings and probably always would, but I had decided some time ago that I was done letting it make decisions for me. Ryan had changed his plea to guilty in April. His attorneys had finally given him the advice he should have taken in February, and he had taken it 6 weeks too late to matter much. Emily had completed her cooperation testimony in June 3 days, in a federal interview room, answering every question put to her with the careful thoroughness of someone who has decided that the only thing she has left to protect is the truth. Judge Whitman entered. The room rose. The sentencing took 40 minutes. Ryan Walsh, 14 years in federal custody, 5 years supervised release upon completion. Wire fraud, embezzlement, criminal negligence, resulting in bodily harm, forgery of financial instruments. His attorney made a statement about his client's remorse. Ryan sat with his hands folded on the table and did not look at anyone. Emily Carter Walsh, 18 months in federal custody, 3 years supervised, released, the terms of her cooperation agreement honored in full. She was present, but not in the courtroom. She had already reported to the facility in accordance with the agreement timeline. When Judge Whitman invited the victim impact statement, Robert touched my arm. I wheeled myself, then caught myself, stood, pushed the wheelchair aside, and walked to the podium on my own. My knee burned with every step. I didn't care. I looked at Ryan. He finally met my eyes, and what I saw there was not the calculated confidence of the man who had sat across my boardroom table or laughed on the phone from a restaurant. What I saw was a man who had arrived too late, and at considerable cost, at an honest understanding of what he had done. I did not feel satisfaction at that. I felt tired in a way that had nothing to do with the walk to the podium. I built Carter infrastructure with my hands, I said. My voice carried easily in the quiet room. Every structure we put up was a promise to the engineers who designed it, to the crews who built it, and to the people who would live and work inside it. That promise was the foundation of everything. I paused. When you replaced load-bearing steel with substandard material to protect money you had already stolen, you didn't just break the law. You broke faith with every person who trusted that promise. People who had no idea what was happening above their heads. Ryan's jaw tightened. He looked down at the table. I have two things to say, and then I'm done. I gripped the sides of the podium, not from weakness, from the need to hold on to something solid, while I said the next part. The first is that the people who made this possible were not lawyers or federal agents, though I am grateful for both. They were a site manager who wrote an email no one was supposed to answer, a bookkeeper who kept copies under her bed for 3 months, a nurse who showed up every day when my own family did not, and a 16-year-old boy who understood what a son owes a grandfather before his father ever learned what a husband owes a wife. Frank Doyle in the back row pressed his fist against his mouth. Nora Vance's shoulders shook once. Sarah beside Tyler reached over and took his hand without looking at him. The second thing, I said, and now my voice dropped lower, not from grief, but from the particular weight of something that has finally found its right shape after a long time searching, is that forgiveness is not a door you walk through once. It is a road you choose to stay on day after day, even when it is hard. I am not at the end of that road. I looked at the table where Ryan sat, but I have chosen to be on it. Judge Whitman thanked me. I walked back to my seat. Tyler stood up when I reached him. Just stood automatically, the way you stand for something you respect, and then sat back down and gripped my forearm with both hands. "Grandpa," he said. His voice was wrecked and young and absolutely certain. That was everything. Outside on the courthouse steps, the September sun hit my face like something deliberate. Houston sprawled out in every direction, glass and steel and concrete, 10,000 buildings standing, because the people who built them had believed in what they were doing. Sarah stood beside me. Neither of us spoke for a moment, which was not silence. It was the sound of two people who had been through something large together and had not yet found the words for it, and were not in any hurry to. "What comes next?" she asked finally. I looked out at the skyline. "We build something real," I said. 3 months after the sentencing, I walked back into Carter Infrastructure's headquarters for the first time as something other than the man who had built it. I was still the founder, still the majority shareholder. But I had spent 30 years being the person who held everything together by force of will. And I had finally understood, slowly, painfully, in a hospital room at 2 in the morning, that holding everything together by yourself is not strength. It is just loneliness wearing a business suit. The first order of business was Michael Grant. I called him into my office on a Tuesday morning in October and told him he was the new CEO of Carter Infrastructure Group, effective immediately. He looked at me for a long moment, with the expression of a man who has been offered something he genuinely did not expect and is trying to determine whether he deserves it. "You've known this company longer than almost anyone still standing," I told him. "You know where the bones are. I need someone who will build on them honestly." He shook my hand. His grip was firm and his eyes were wet, and he didn't say anything, which from Michael Grant meant more than a speech would have. Nora Vance became CFO the same week. I told her the new audit system she would design needed to be built so that nothing like what Ryan had done could go undetected for more than 30 days. She pulled out a notepad and started writing before I finished the sentence. Frank Doyle's office was on the 2nd floor, a real office with his name on the door, and a direct line to every active site superintendent in the company. Director of Construction Safety. The position had not existed before. It existed now because Frank had written an email that nobody answered, and I intended to make sure that never happened again. The James Bennett Fund was established in November, named for Sarah's father, funded by a portion of Carter Infrastructure's annual profit, designed to provide insurance support and financial assistance to the families of construction workers killed or seriously injured on Texas job sites. Sarah served as founding advisor. When I told her the name, she stood very still for a moment. Her hand pressed flat against the desk between us, and then she looked up at me with eyes that were bright and full and said very quietly, "He would have liked knowing it meant something." I wrote Tyler a letter by hand. 3 pages, which took me 2 evenings because I kept starting over. I told him what he had done and what it had cost him and what it was worth. I told him that his grandmother had always said the measure of a person was not what they did when it was easy, but what they did when it wasn't. I told him she would have been right about him. The letter to Emily was 1 paragraph. I told her the door was not closed. I told her that what came next was entirely her choice and that I would be here when she was ready. I sealed it and mailed it to the facility address Robert had given me, and I did not allow myself to wonder whether she would read it. Some things you do because they are right, not because you are certain of the outcome. On a Tuesday in December, I sat in the back of a company truck and watched a crew break ground on the first Carter infrastructure project, built entirely under the new safety standards, every material independently certified, every structural element signed off by Frank's team before installation, every worker on site covered under the new insurance framework. Frank stood beside the crew chief hardhat on clipboard in hand, pointing at something on the site plan, with the focused energy of a man who has been given back the work he loves and intends to do it properly. Sarah stood a few feet away from me, watching. She had driven me out here without being asked, had simply appeared at my door that morning with coffee and her car keys, and said, "I thought you might want company for this one." I had not argued. Tyler was at school. He had sent me a text that morning, just 4 words. "Go get them, Grandpa." I looked out at the site, at the crew moving across the fresh-turned earth, with the particular purposeful energy of people who believe in what they are building. At Frank's clipboard, at the sky above Houston, pale blue and enormous, and completely indifferent to everything that had happened in the past 14 months. The way skies are, the way the world is continuing. Regardless. But we were here. Still building. Building differently. Sarah handed me a coffee from the thermos she'd brought. "Margaret would have liked this," she said. "She would have taken credit for it," I said. Sarah laughed a real laugh, sudden and warm, the kind that surprises you into joining it. And I did. Standing on a construction site in December with a bad knee and a company I had nearly lost, and a family that looked nothing like it had 14 months ago, I laughed. It felt unexpectedly like something beginning. Looking back at everything, the recovery room, the unanswered calls, the 14 months that changed my life, I keep returning to one simple truth. I was lucky. Not because of money, not because I won, but because God put the right people beside me at the exact moment I needed them most, and not one of them shared my blood. I spent 60 years building walls out of steel and concrete. I forgot to build the ones that mattered, the ones inside a family. Don't be like me. Don't wait until you're lying alone in a hospital bed to understand what presence actually means. Don't confuse providing for your family with truly knowing them. These are not the same thing. Family stories. Revenge and betrayal don't begin with monsters. They begin with people who stopped showing up. Family drama revenge is never worth the cost, not to the person who suffered it, and not to the person who caused it. What I know now, at 60 years old, sitting on a construction site, watching something honest being built, the most valuable thing you will ever own is the trust of the people who chose to stay. These family stories, revenge, are never really about the money. They are always, always about love that was never said out loud. If this story touched your heart, comment, share, and subscribe. Your support means everything. Thank you for staying until the very end. The stories on this channel contain fictional elements for educational purposes. If this content isn't right for you right now, step away freely and come back whenever you're ready. This door is always open.